read the signals and then figure out what archetype he is very, very quickly, and then understands the different card evaluations as the draft goes along.
And it looks like we are getting set here. You're able to see Steve Rubin there on the screen, so he will be our first drafter of the day. As we're heading into this, too, one thing that really stands out to me, as opposed to sort of the constructed tournaments, is that we've hit the point where these are the 8 best records in the room.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of this pod, at the end of these 3 rounds, one of them will have gone 0-3.
Right. Yeah, and if it's certainly one of the even if one of the 9-0 players, for example, to go win 3, they've been eliminated from top 8 contention. So you could be at the very top of the standings and find yourself out of the running for the trophy right away. But multiple of these players, by virtue of a 3-0 or 2-1 record, are going to be the types of players that we see playing down the stretch with a chance to make this top 8.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I also want to just hear from you a little bit is that heading into this format, it is still a little bit fresh, it is still a little bit new, but are there any archetypes that are really standing out to you heading into this one that maybe Steve Rubin or these other players will really be looking for?
Well, I'll say that it's early, so it's early time for the pros. I would say I've heard from other, kind of world-class players a preference for blue-green, for white-green, and a lot of people that like the white-red go-wide decks.
And here we are taking a look at the first pack. We've got Palaka Worm, we have got Vampire Sovereign as an option as well, Boggart Brew, Enigma Drake. There are a lot of powerful options in this pack.
Yeah, certainly the Palaka Worm and the Vampire Sovereign stand out as two of the really top uncommons here. Enigma Drake is another card that people like and certainly might be looking at. Steve will not want to be starting with a gold or a 2-color card right off the bat. Palaka Worm and Vampire Sovereign, both really high power cards, and they also happen to fit some of the key archetypes those colors like to be in. So.
And it looks like that is going to be the Palaka Worm. What a cool card. 7 mana, gain 7, draw a card when it dies, trample. It doesn't get a whole lot better than this card.
It doesn't get a whole lot better, and I think in terms of how powerful it is, pretty close to the Vampire Sovereign, but from what I've heard, a lot of the players seem to think that green may be the single best color, so Steve will be really happy to start with Palaka Worm.
And we're going to be heading into the second pack here, or I'm sorry, the second pick of the first pack. Now, what kind of decision comes into picking a card early on that has got green, green, green in its cost?
Yeah, at this point, right, you can never splash a Palaka Worm, so you're really hoping that you can take a few green cards early and solidify yourself in just green, and then at that point, find another color. The good news about green is that it tends to go with any other color in M19.
So we've got Electrify, we've got Declare Dominance in this pack. There was also an Angel of the Dawn, which is that 3/3 flyer that gives your creatures +1/+1. Bristling Boar, also an option within green.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Steve doesn't value the Transmogrifying Wand at all. I think pretty close between Electrify and Declare Dominance. He goes with Electrify, and this is in this case where he's immediately dipping into another color. Totally defensible. I slightly prefer the Declare Dominance, but even if he ends up in, say, a green-blue deck, he can still play Electrify, and you certainly want to make sure that you get enough removal in your deck.
Yeah, and removal is such a critical part of what they're trying to draft because it can do so much for your game plan.
Yeah, it can allow you to get a creature through in order to deal damage, or it can also deal with a problematic threat and immediately rewarded.
Yeah, a second copy of Electrify. Also, he's looking at Arcades the Strategist, but this is one of those gold cards. This is one of those flagship dragons. 4 mana. It is the white, blue, and green.
Yeah, the Bant Elder Dragon, comfortably the worst of the 5 Elder Dragons, and certainly a reasonable card in a specific archetype, but Electrify is a perfect fit for kind of the direction that Steve seems to be going.
And 2 Electrifies just seems like phenomenal. An instant speed, 4 mana for 4 damage.
Yeah, and it was a premium card when it was first printed, and is still kind of a premium type card. He got past one and now past another, and he's going to feel pretty comfortable at this point that red is going to continue flowing throughout the draft.
Knightly Valor showing up as well alongside a Pegasus Courser, and there's Druid of the Cowl at this stage.
I've heard people call Druid of the Cowl the single best common, and certainly in a green-red deck, one of the absolute premier cards that you could possibly want to draft. So, yeah, I would be pretty happy to see Druid of the Cowl here. We see him really highly value this Knightly Valor, which is interesting.
And yeah, that's what he's going to take. This is the card that gives +2/+2 and Vigilance, plus it creates another 2/2 with Vigilance.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
surprising
powerful
pick for me. Yeah, first surprising pick of the draft for me. You know, it's certainly Knightly Valor, extremely strong card, quite good in, for example, a white-red deck. You know, but it seemed like Druid of the Cowl was kind of a perfect fit for the first 3 cards that he drafted. So surprising that he goes in another direction here.
So we're heading into this pack. We see Boggart Brute coming to the front pretty early, and one thing that I often hear described from people playing Limited is that they're trying to find where their seat wants to be at the table. Can you elaborate that a little bit while we're taking a look at cards like One with the Machine?
Yeah, you're trying to figure out, you know, just from a volume and a power level perspective, what kind of colors are flowing in your direction. Steve is correctly identified. Certainly it seems like red is flowing in his direction, so he's kind of locking himself into red. He's still trying to figure out what's my second color, what sort of signals am I reading. He's seen some white, certainly, you know, not a lot of black or blue.
So we've got a Trumpet Blast in this hand. That is one of the premier cards of that red-white archetype. We've also got Gallant Cavalry in there. There is also an Explosive Apparatus. This is one of those cards that we saw a lot of yesterday in these sealed pools. You mentioned that it may lose some of its value today.
Yeah, I think he's going to take the Gallant Cavalry. That's by far the best card in the booster and one of the best cards that you can have for one of these white-red go-wide decks where you're going to highly value cards that create tokens and make multiple threats for one card investment.
Yeah, and we're sort of seeing him swap off of that Palaka Worm that we saw. That was the first, you know, the pack one, pick one. But since then, we saw him take a couple of red cards, and now he's really just taking some of the white cards that also have a much less restrictive mana cost. Yeah,
I mean, certainly he correctly identified that it seemed like white was open from his seat, and he's been rewarded with a few good options to take white cards. So he's I don't think he's completely given up on the idea of maybe including Palaka Worm in his deck. He's only really committed to red at this point, but certainly with a bias towards being Boros over red-green.
Yeah, and taking that Goblin Instigator probably helps reinforce that. But this is that 2-mana 1/1 that creates another 1/1 when it enters the battlefield. Timber Gorge. Let me ask you, how do you feel about at what point, you know, how valuable is drafting lands?
Well, they're in a 2-color deck, they're a luxury. In a 3-color deck, they're a necessity. So obviously this late, you know, if he does end up being a red-green deck, he's going to be really happy to just have one just to smooth his mana, so you can do something like an 8/8 plus a dual land type of mana base, but they're not an absolute necessity, especially in a more streamlined 2-color deck, and certainly nothing that you want to take over a solid playable.
Gotcha. And we had a Catalyst Elemental. We've got one in this pack as well. Invoke the Divine, also an option alongside that Novice Knight, which is a 2/3 for 1 mana. Really good rate, but it's got Defender. As long as you equip it or enchant it, then it can start actually swinging in. Invoke the Divine, though.
Yeah, you know, I think that good players and great drafters really highly value set drafting for the sideboard. So making sure you get access to something like a Disenchant effect in pack 1 means that you don't have to take it over something that you're going to need later on. And, you know, against a lot of the really powerful auras and artifacts in this format, it's really good to have access to one of those in your sideboard.
We're going to take a combat trick in Sure Strike. That gives it +3/+0. Also adds a little bit of first strike. Going into this one, we see Stone Quarry as an option. He is already pretty nicely into that red-white deck. You talked about that's a luxury. I mean, at this stage in the draft, probably feeling pretty good.
No doubt. And certainly nothing too exciting to take over it. So pretty happy to have one of those.
A lot of smelts in the pack.
Yeah, Smelt, the poor man's Invoke the Divine. You know, certainly, you know, if you need to kill a Chaos Wand or something of that nature, it'll work in a pinch, but you would prefer to have Invoke.
And I'm pretty curious, Tectonic Rift strikes me as a pretty interesting card, because we've seen cards similar to this where they destroy target land in the past, and in Limited, they never really feel like they do a whole lot, but this card, it does have a secondary ability on that. Also, we're going to take a thud here. Yeah,
I've been impressed with Tectonic Rift. I think that in some of these white-red, again, go wide type archetypes, if you don't end up with a critical mass of Trumpet Blast and Inspired Charge, you have to have some way to reward yourself or to utilize a bunch of kind of creatures that are below size late in the game.
How good would it feel to thud that Palaka Worm?
Feel pretty good, but I think that you know, we saw that Steve really was happy to give it up. The inflection point of the draft obviously was when he decided to take Knightly Valor over Druid of the Cowl. But, again, he doesn't have so many white cards that he couldn't dip back into green if you were to open up, Vivian or something of that nature. So he's committed to red. He's still kind of dabbling around into his second color.
Yeah, Timber Gorge and Stone Quarry both really helping enable some of those secondary colors he could find himself in that realm, though that Palaka Worm, it's hard to splash for triple green.
Right. Yeah. The real tough part, in situations like this is you don't want to open up like a Draconic Disciple and a Shock and and give yourself that sort of a decision, right? Where you have a really, really powerful uncommon for a red-green deck, or you can kind of take a good but not incredible common and stay the course. So at some point, you need to move from I'm staying open to I'm committing to this two-color archetype, and I think Steve realizes that we're gonna get pretty close to that point in the draft early in Pack 2, and we'll see how he navigates that decision.
So we're now looking at the end of Pack 1, all things considered. Do you think Steve's feeling pretty comfortable heading into this second pack? He's going to take a look at it, but like you said, he's pretty solidly committed to a color. He's got some options in others.
Yeah, he's got removal. He's got pretty reasonable power level. He's got some creatures to fill the curve. So, he's probably a little bit light on just total amount of playable cards, but certainly he's at least knows that he's going to get some red in Pack 3, barring some weirdness. So he really wants to just solidify himself in a second color, continue to fill that curve, and pick up some more high power level cards.
And now we're going to be heading into the section of the draft where these players are going to start passing in the other direction. So now they've been passing the cards that they don't take to the player on their left, which creates their options. Now they're going to be receiving the cards from that player. What kind of effect can that have on your draft?
Right. So, we saw, Steve took a lot of the red cards in Pack 1, right? And so by taking a lot of the red cards in Pack 1, it decreases the chances the player on your left takes the red cards, which will increase the probability that he's going to get past more red cards in Pack 2. So we call that cutting a color. By cutting off the supply of red to the left, it increases the supply of red to the right. So,
and we're taking a look at Spark-Tongue Dragon. We've also got a copy of Luminous Bonds, which is sort of a 3-mana pacifism. That creature can't attack, it can't block, it removes it pretty solidly from combat.
And we already have an inflection point here, right? Luminous Bond's the best card in the booster, but that kind of solidifies him out of green and into white. And he's gonna make the decision. So I think this is the time where he's taking that Palaka Worm, but he's completely abandoned it. Barring getting past the green mythic pretty much right now, he's going to settle himself into a nice red-white deck and be happy to do that.
I mean, his removal suite has already come in together pretty nicely. We've got that Spark-Tongue Dragon. He was sort of keeping an eye on that as well as the Luminous Bonds early on. Liliana, Untouched by Death, also hanging out, needing to take a look at that card.
Yeah, and not the kind of card that he's going to be tempted to go to another color with. I think he's really happy to pick up a second copy of Knightly Valor here.
Yeah, and Knightly Valor as opposed to Spark-Tongue Dragon, we saw him really compare that Spark-Tongue Dragon to the Luminous Bonds, and now the Knightly Valor is the card that just moved right to the front of the pack.
Yeah, Knightly Valor, on pure power level alone, is close to a bomb in this format, but then you actually add in the synergies with the white-red deck, where, again, we talked about being able to not only amplify a threat, but create another threat with a card, and it works so well with a lot of the different inspired charge type effects. So Knightly Valor quite strong in Boros.
It was good then, it's good now. There's going to be another copy of that Knightly Valor. How many is too many?
Wow, and a Cleansing Nova and a Luminous Bonds. Wow.
Cleansing Nova. Now this is the one you can destroy all creatures, you can destroy all artifacts and enchantments. This strikes me as an interesting card in Limited because sometimes you're ahead on board. Like, do you want this card in your deck always?
It's going to be worst in Boros, but it's such a good card that it would be defensible to take it anyway and then just look for good situations to play it. Certainly Knightly Valor would be kind of the standard pick here, but I wouldn't have faulted Steve if he wanted to take the Cleansing Nova. Really important for him to obviously be aware that it exists and kind of understand which the players are to his right who might end up taking it so that he can play around it during the games.
And that's actually something that is a little bit different than, say, if you were doing your testing on Magic Online,
right,
where you have access to the leagues.
Mm-hmm.
Very often, if you pass a card, you'll never see it again,
right,
because you are going to be playing against a wide variety of players. What you're talking about is really being aware that the table that you're at is who your opponents are going to be, and when you pass a powerful card, you need to be aware of where it's going to end up.
Yep, different dynamic here at the competitive tournaments where you play against those 8 players. So Steve picks up another Gallant Cavalry here, and I think he wants to be very careful that his curve is getting a little bit high for a white-red deck. He already has 3 copies of Knightly Valor, 2 of Gallant Cavalry, and he really wants to fill in those 2 and 3 drops as these next couple picks happen. And he may be in a situation where he has to take an underpowered 2 or 3 drop over something that's more powerful but more expensive in order to just fill his curve.
And we see a Regal Bloodlord in there. There's also the Viashina Pyromancer, a Fire Elemental, Gutter Snipe also in the pack, which is a card that benefits you for casting instants and sorceries, and we know that he's at least got a couple of copies of Electrify.
Yep.
That trusty pack beast, 3 mana, 2/3. It also has some artifact synergies, though I don't think he's had too many of those, and I think that's going to be the Fire Elemental.
Yeah, that's a surprising pick for me. I mean, we just talked about kind of his curve considerations. Picks up another 5 casting cost card. So Steve is drafting a different type of Boros deck. You know, he's going to try to create battle cruisers with these Knightly Valors, but I think that would do well to consider curve at some point here as the draft moves along.
So we've got a Satyr Enchanter. That is the 2 colors that he has at least picked up lands for as the splash is, but that would be pretty far. We've also got Tormenting Voice. We've got Dwarven Priest as option as well.
Yeah, pretty close. You know, again, he's got plenty of 4 drops. Tormenting Voice, pretty mediocre. I think that totally defensible pick given how much token generation he has. Take the Dwarven Priest. We talked about how strong it is in a race. It happens to wear Knightly Valor really well. 4/6 Vigilance is a really tough size to deal with. So,
and we're going to take a look here. We have got the Catalyst Elemental as an option. Rupture Spire is an option as well. Is this another one of those cards that when you're looking at it as a 2-color deck, maybe it's a luxury, but it starts becoming premium beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, the real question is he ever going to include Catalyst Elemental or Lava Axe in his deck? And I think the answer is probably no. So he just takes the Rupture Spire. He thinks, okay, now with Rupture Spire and Timber Gorge, if I do pick up, you know, some sort of green card I want to splash, I can do that potentially reasonably. He also wants to deny that maybe to someone else who's gotten a little bit too ambitious with their mana base.
Gotcha. And we see Stone Quarry, Havoc Devils. We've also got access to the Viashina Pyromancer. There is an Act of Treason in here as well, and it's going to be the Havoc Devils. These 4 drops just keep on coming.
Yeah, so Steve's taking a different approach than I would have with this draft, certainly. He is confident that he can either fill in the early part of his curve later in the draft or doesn't really value that portion of Boros as highly as I do. So he's got tremendous amount of 4 and 5 drops, really not much at 2 and 3. So
and maybe as we head into sort of the back end of these packs, he'll be looking to re-pick up some of those earlier cards that he was passing that have that lower CMC, maybe trying to solidify himself in it.
Yeah, he's going to be thrilled to see this Goblin Instigator here. I mean, that's sort of exactly the sort of card that you want, both for Boros, and it fills a 2-drop spot in the curve. So very, very happy to see Goblin Instigator this late in the pack.
Also had access to a Dragon Egg as well as a Tormenting Voice. Decided to pass on those ones. Taking a look here, and there is another copy of that Catalyst Elemental. Also a Knight of the Tusk, which is just a massive creature. A 3/7.
Yeah, and the kind of card that I'm not embarrassed to play if I have to play it. Not a high power level card, but as a curve topper, it can be fine. 7 is a tremendous amount of toughness, and if you're able to amplify it with an aura, that can be really strong. But certainly not a card he's likely to play given his curve already.
And it's the Loxodon Linebreaker. This is the 3 mana 3/2 in white. Reasonable card. It's a vanilla.
Yeah, the sort of card I hope to not put in my deck. Again, given his curve considerations, he's almost certainly going to be playing the Linebreaker, and he just wants to make sure he has a creature on the battlefield for when he starts entering the Knightly Valor phase of the game.
Okay, so really trying to make sure that just anything exists that he can survive, that he's got tools available to him, so that when a certain stage in the game where he can really start going over the top.
Yeah, we see a pretty late Gutter Snipe there. Gutter Snipe is not a spectacular card, not a bomb by any stretch, but that's a little later than you would expect Gutter Snipe to go. And now in the late Tormenting Voice, we see Steve being rewarded for what I mentioned earlier, cutting red so hard in pack 1. You know, he's now pretty confident the person to his left was not drafting red, and so he's going to be rewarded with red in pack 2, and we have a good feeling he's also going to get red in pack 3. So that's kind of the benefit of both A, correctly reading a draft, and B, cutting a color in order to set yourself up for color to flow.
I mean, I don't think we saw a single off-color pick in that second pack. I think everything that he grabbed was exactly something that he was looking for, and he ended up taking a basic land at the end. That was about as far as it went.
Yeah, and there wasn't really anything so dramatic that he needed to hate draft, right? So that he needed to defensively draft from someone else at the table that he was afraid he was going to lose to. So that's usually a pretty good sign, right? When you get past a fairly late mythic of a strong mythic of another color, and you aren't able to take it, that's sometimes a sign that you're not in the right colors for your seat.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Okay. So keeping an eye on what actually is coming to you when it comes down to Pack 2, Pack 3, at what stage can you still actually start switching?
Well, I think that for him, the decision point was pretty early on in this pack when he, took that Luminous Bonds. I think it was a Luminous Bonds early on in Pack 2. That was when he decided, okay, I'm going to kind of put the blinders on. I'm into white-red, and it's too late to switch. At some point, barring a few cards in Magic history that are so high power level, pack rat type power level, you do need to be able to get enough playable cards in order to make an actual Magic deck, since you're only going to draw these broken mythics and rares so often.
And you mentioned it earlier, but the CMC of this deck, the converted mana cost on average is pretty high right now.
Yeah, I'll say it's non-traditional for a Boros deck. So it looks like he's got 2 2-drops in the 2 Goblin Instigators, and then 1 3-drop that you're happy to play in Boggart Brute, and then 1 that he's going to play.
And then just a giant pile of 4s and 5s.
And then a giant pile of 4s and 5s. So, realistically, you want your deck to have like at least 7 or 8 2 and 3 drops combined. He's got 4 going into Pack 3. And so he's going to really want to try to pick some of those up. And he would like to not have to play any more vanilla 3-2 Loxodon Linebreaker. So love to pick up some, Anaki Ogres, some more Boggart Brutes, maybe another Instigator, Cavalry Drill Master, those kinds of quality 2 and 3 drops. We saw him pass up the opportunity to take a few Viashino Pyromancers in Pack 2. Which, if your deck doesn't end up with Viashino Pyromancer, you're not gonna cry about it. But it would have been nice to have something like that to fill the curve, so he wouldn't have to make uncomfortable picks in Pack 3.
And he's going to be heading into this one. This is his last pack, so this is going to be where he really just tries to sort of put a bow on it.
Right.
Of sorts, he's already got a pretty solid foundation of this deck. He's very solidly into his colors. Now it's trying to navigate himself into just the position of filling in whatever holes that he deemed when he was looking through it at the end of that second.
Yeah, and he'd like to just open up like a Johnny or Heroic Reinforcements or one of those, border posts of this archetype.
I mean, last time that I did some limited coverage, we had JVL go with a called shot. He called a Demon Lord Belzenlock.
Wow.
Yeah. Are you prepared to make a call? Oh, sorry.
I'll call Shock.
Okay, Shock's that's a very... Almost had it. So we have got an Angel of the Dawn. There is Demanding Dragon.
Yep.
Oh, this card's good.
Yeah, Demanding Dragon, one of the better rares, certainly in red, one of the better rares in the format. 5-mana 5/5 Flying Dragon, you're certainly absolutely happy to have that. And it happens to just nug them for a quick 5 damage unless they sacrifice a creature. So this is just an absolutely brutal card. It is another 5-drop, but it's quite a bit better than Fire Elemental.
Yeah, and he actually is also passing Electrify as well as Angel of the Dawn, both cards that he could very reasonably end up trying to pick up later if he is lucky enough.
Yeah, I doubt that he'll table those 2 cards, but the value over the replacement level given his other 4 and 5 mana options is not that high, whereas Demanding Dragon is the best 4 and 5 mana card that he has. So pretty awesome to have red be the one color that you were sure you're supposed to be the entire draft, and then open up a really strong red rare in Pack 3.
And that triggered ability is just so excellent. It does give your opponent the choice, but it's just so hard to think of a world in which either one of those are bad. Yeah,
and red-white is probably the best archetype for that triggered ability, because you're already sort of, in theory, pressuring your opponent's life total, and so they don't have necessarily 5 life, a trivial 5 life to sacrifice or to pay.
Okay, and then it becomes really almost a deterministic.
A pure edict effect, yeah, and that's tough.
5/5 dragon that eats a creature when it comes down.
Yep.
That's going to be tough to beat. So let's see what we can do here in the next pack. He's got to be feeling good, but he is still looking for some of these 2s, these 3s.
And he would settle for things like shocks and luminous bonds, right? At this point, his high end is so high end that he doesn't necessarily need to beat down early in the game. He can play a long game, which is abnormal for red white. He does need some way to interact early on.
Have you ever seen a dragon get knighted?
I have not.
Yeah, that should be fun. We have got Havoc Devils in this one. Oh, and Spitflame also an option. This is the 3 mana, 4 damage to a creature at instant speed, and then whenever a dragon enters, you can pay a red to get it back. Also taking a look at that Havoc Devils if he wants to go for something that would actually be on the battlefield. Gallant Cavalry and Diamond Mare also.
Good clean living in Booster Draft is when you successfully identify a color, cut the color, it flows in pack 1. Pack 3, you open up a rare of that color, and then the person to your right, who you're very confident is not in that color, opens a rare of that color as well, and then is obligated to pass to you because they can't include it in their deck. That is how you get your way to a 3-0 Booster Draft deck at the competitive level. So, and the fact that it's also another card that costs, fewer than 4 mana, he's going to be thrilled about that.
There's the Onaki Ogre as well. This is that 3 mana 4/2 Sure Strike in there as well. Also looking at a copy of Inspired Charge and Leonin Vanguard. Inspired Charge. That's a closer. Yeah,
see, in a normal Boros deck, it would be an easy Inspired Charge here. I think he's going to be strongly tempted, at least, by the Onaki Ogre, just because he doesn't have that many of the cheap creatures. So it's a very close pick.
Also taking a look at this Leonin Vanguard, and it's going to be the Inspired Charge.
Yeah, so Steve's deck is it's a little abnormal. It's the old go big wide deck. He's going to need to get up to 5 mana and then start creating tokens and then Inspired Charge. So it's a little bit of a weird version of the deck, but
Daybreak Chaplain, an option alongside Marauder's Axe. There's that Cavalry Drillmaster that you were talking about earlier as well. All 3 of these pretty reasonable options.
Yeah, he's thrilled to pick up a 2-drop creature here. I think either one of those is pretty strong.
I mean, one of them, it is a 1/3. It's got lifelink, which can help buy some time. That Cavalry Drillmaster, a bit more aggressive. The Axe just turns any one of those smaller creatures, even the Goblin Instigator, into a very nice attacking threat.
Yeah, and again, we see Steve, valuing spells and late game over curve. So perhaps his preparation for this tournament took him in a different direction with Boros than mine has. He's really going to want to draw those 2 Goblin Instigators that he drew because so much of his deck works really well with them.
And there's that Suspicious Bookcase. We saw it yesterday. I love this card. The flavor of it is delightful. It's also just a really nice 0/4 defender for 2 that you could start putting mana into later in the game.
Yeah, you don't traditionally think of Suspicious Bookcase being the type of card that would go into a Boros deck, but remember, Steve picked up 3 copies of Knightly Valor early on, so very easy to imagine him creating a 4 or even a 6 power creature in the middle of the game, at which point Suspicious Bookcase's activated ability goes from annoying to devastating.
Yep, and we do have access to that Hostile Minotaur. That's the 4 mana 3/3 with haste. Also has access to a Dwarven Priest, one of those a bit more defensive, one of them much more aggressive.
Yeah. And pretty close here in terms of these 2 cards. Easy to kind of include either in your deck. Hostile Minotaur, probably a little bit better, in a vacuum. A little bit better if you're trying to be aggressive as well.
Yep, and from a stats perspective, it's a 2/3 this is a 3/3 as opposed to the 2/4 of the Dwarven Priest.
And he already has access to a Dwarven Priest, so he has some of that life gain effect already.
There's a Loxodon Linebreaker, a Trumpet Blast, and a Havoc Devils. He's still getting options.
Yeah, and my old predictive system would have been to guess that he'd take the 3-drop, but Steve just wants to fill his deck with as many 4 and 5 casting cards as possible. So he certainly will not have any lack of them.
I mean, when we're watching his actual games happen, it's going to be so interesting to watch this evolution as he just turns the corner heading into turn 4 each time, because it just feels like there's such a significant jump in his options at that 4th land. Goblin Motivator and Act of Treason, also a Magistrate's Scepter. You ever see an extra turn taken with that?
I have not.
Not yet? Oh, this might be the time. There's one in the pool. We'll see if someone is bold enough to make it happen.
Yeah.
We probably need Sam Black for that, right?
Yes, or some mechanics that do not exist in Magic 2019.
Oh, and actually, it looks like yesterday we had Ben Stark take an extra turn. So we were able to actually see one yesterday
Wow.
with Magistrate Scepter. We'll have to get him back in here, try and get another extra turn.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that Steve's deck looks like, to me, it's got pretty high power level. He certainly has removal. He's got some synergies. The question is, he's going to look at a lot of hands that look like about 3 lands and 4 cards that cost 4 or more. And so with those kinds of hands, is he going to be able to apply enough pressure on his opponent before they're able to kind of deploy their game plan?
Havoc Devils is going to be the take. 4 drops after 4 drops after 4 drops after 4 drops. I mean, those Havoc Devils, they wear the Knightly Valor
Yes.
quite well.
Yeah, it's a great card to wear, Knightly Valor. Oh, wow.
And we see the Onaki Ogre come back around, also a copy of the Explosive Apparatus.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. The Onaki Ogre, I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful to see that. Obviously, we talked about red being open, but the table, a card that fills his curve right now and is just an absolutely fine rate. He's going to be thrilled to see that Onaki Ogre come around.
Magistrate Scepter, maybe Crash Through. Crash Through probably a little bit more likely. Looks like actually, yeah. That might have been the Uncomfortable Chill that we just took.
Yeah, I think that for those people who've been playing with Inspired Charge type decks, Uncomfortable Chill can turn some of those nasty Trumpet Blast Inspired Charge combats into a good situation for your opponent. So he doesn't want to run into Uncomfortable Chill. And we talked about, again, earlier on, in competitive levels, he knows he would have to face that Uncomfortable Chill if he didn't take it now.
He ends up taking also a Lockstone Linebreaker, ending things with a Reliquary Tower, which could very easily go into, his commander deck. And then ending things with a Swamp. So that is Steve Rubin's deck. 3 packs in, identifies red, gets rewarded with Demanding Dragon right into that 3rd pack, which is followed up immediately by Spitflame, another one of these red rares. How's he feeling? How are you feeling about this red-white deck?
Yeah, I mean, again, so you think about a few different things, right? Do I have high power level? Yes. Do I have removal spells and answers? Yes. He's got Electrifies and Spit Flames and Luminous Bonds. Do I have a good mana curve? No, he does not have a good mana curve. He has 2 2-drops, a few 3-drops he's happy to play. He's going to need to have good draws. If he happens to draw his 2 and 3-drops during the games, his deck is going to look unbelievably good because he's got the power level and the removal spells to be able to compete with anybody.
Well, that's just one of the decks that we're going to be able to see drafted here. Stick with us because when we get back, we're going to have the opportunity to see Michael Cochran.